several migrants have now been involved in altercations with officers.
As many as 4 migrants are now facing criminal charges. They're accused of threatening, even hitting Chicago police officers in the last 2 days.
2 other violent or threatening incidents reported yesterday involving 12th District migrants, according to sources, raising concern about what appears to be an untenable situation.
In a city known for welcoming all, the situation in Chicago takes a dramatic turn. The streets, now overflowing with migrants, make the citizens of Chicago feel unsafe. The migrants, some peaceful asylum seekers and others illegal immigrants with criminal backgrounds, cause chaos on the streets, putting Chicagoans' lives at great risk.
Increasingly, the migrant crisis is being felt far from the border, including cities like Chicago, where officials say resources are running thin.
A total of 17,000 migrants showing up since last August, and officials expect 1,200 per day to keep coming.
This bold step challenges the Windy City's promise of shelter. With laws that guarantee shelter for those in need, the city faces a real test, managing this surge without turning its back on its values. It's a moment that asks, what happens when the Windy City meets a logistical nightmare? The city's budget is already tense, sparking debate among city officials and leaders about the cause of action. Stay with us as we delve deeper into Chicago's migrant crisis. The impact on the streets.
This is exactly the situation city leaders and migrants feared. There are thousands of asylum seekers sleeping on sidewalks all over the city.
This morning, hundreds of migrants are still without homes. They are sleeping at the airport in some cases, outside of Chicago police departments. And as they wait for help, they say the city isn't offering any answers.
A surge in migrants has brought to the fore an issue that's hard to ignore, the impact on the streets, where the narrative is quickly changing. First up, let's address the elephant in the room, safety. With an increase in the migrant population, a significant number of whom are men, there's a growing concern about criminal activities. It's an uncomfortable truth, but not all who arrive seek a fresh start. Among the newcomers are individuals with past criminal records, bringing a layer of complexity to the city's safety measures.
Brighton Park neighbors have been protesting this possible migrant tent camp location for hours now, even launching fireworks at one point. Residents we spoke with say they feel betrayed by city leadership and are concerned for their safety.
The streets of Chicago, known for their lively atmosphere, now echo with the footsteps of concern as residents and law enforcement grapple with the challenge of distinguishing between those in need and those who might pose a threat. But the story doesn't end there.
Officials tonight said Daly College is an ideal location because it's move-in ready and a fraction of the cost of a hotel. But many in the crowd didn't want to hear it.
When do citizens of the United States of America come first?
How about this? Give them all these politicians' addresses and put them in their backyards, in their basements, in their houses.
This meeting at Richard J. Daly College comes as the city, starting as early as this weekend, prepares to use this gymnasium until August 1st.
Imagine walking past your local school or college, institutions that stand as beacons of learning and community development. Now, picture them transformed into shelters to house the incoming migrants. Yes, you heard that right. Educational institutions converted into living quarters, a testament to the severity of the situation. Schools and colleges, traditionally spaces of growth and opportunity, are becoming makeshift homes, a scenario that raises questions about the future of education and community resources in Chicago. This can't possibly be a long-term solution, right?
Our plan for temporary emergency shelter was never meant as a long-term housing solution. But we want to give every person and every single family that has come to our city enough time to process their work authorization, find housing, start a new life in our great city. So we have made the decision to extend the shelter state policy.
This move, while a temporary solution to a pressing problem, opens up a Pandora's box of implications. From the impact on students' learning environments to the strain on resources that schools and colleges are already facing, the decision to convert these spaces into shelters is a reflection of the desperate measures the city is resorting to in order to accommodate the migrant surge.
There is no more room at the inn. Police stations throughout Chicago are at capacity when it comes to housing migrants. There are so many, some districts force new arrivals to spend the days outside so the station can be cleaned and used for regular business.
Police stations all across the city took on the difficult role of not only fighting crime, but providing beds.
The police need to feel secure in doing their jobs. They need to feel secure in the space that they're in.
I think what we're seeing is a decrease in the conditions at the police districts. We're now at nearly 2,000 individuals across the 22 districts across the city of Chicago, and we are losing control.
Police stations, another desperate measure, are also filled with migrants. This begs the question, how can officers possibly do their job properly with their desks replaced with beds?
The mayor's office confirming tonight that the type of giant framed tents that are currently being used to house migrants in New York City are similar to what Chicago was looking to do to ease the migrant housing crisis here.
But the tents, they're not just temporary shelters. They're symbols of a deeper crisis. Stretching along sidewalks, dotting the parks, and lining the streets, they're visible reminders of the magnitude of the migrant surge. The tents remind us of the urgent need for solutions that go beyond the immediate and address the root causes of this migration phenomenon. As Chicago navigates this unprecedented situation, the impact on the streets, from safety concerns to the repurposing of educational institutions, paints a picture of a city at a crossroads. The question that looms large is, how will Chicago adapt to this new reality? And at what cost to its citizens? Join us as we delve deeper into the migrant chaos taking place in Chicago. Strain on public services.
Critics accuse the city of prioritizing migrants over citizens.
Imagine opening your wallet only to find it's not just you dipping into it, but an entire city's crisis. That's right, Chicagoans are feeling a pinch, but not from the usual suspects. This time, it's the strain on public services, courtesy of the city's migrant surge. And guess who's footing the bill? It's the taxpayers. As the city opens its arms to thousands of migrants, the financial burden is becoming all too real. Every tent pitched, every meal served, and every emergency service called upon is a reminder that it's the residents' tax dollars at work. But here's the kicker. Those dollars were earmarked for public services that Chicagoans rely on every day, from schools and hospitals to roads and public safety.
These South and West Side homeowners are angry. They believe the city has overextended itself and should be putting the tens of millions of dollars earmarked for migrants into Chicago's most vulnerable neighborhoods.
But the South Side has been under-resourced, underfunded for years, for decades. We have schools that need to be reopened.
The funds are being diverted to address the immediate needs of the migrants. Now, don't get me wrong. Compassion and support for those in need are values we hold dear. But when the city's resources are stretched to their limits, it's the locals who feel the squeeze. There's a growing concern that as more money is channeled into accommodating the migrant surge, there's less left for the Chicagoans who depend on these very services. We're talking about families who've called this city home for generations, now watching as their needs take a back seat to an unfolding crisis. But here's where it gets even more complex. With public services under strain, it's not just about the financial toll. It's about the impact on the quality and availability of these services. Long wait times at hospitals, overcrowded schools, and stretched thin emergency services. These are the realities facing Chicagoans as the city diverts its focus and funds to manage the migrant surge. And let's not forget about those who are already struggling.
Nobody asked us, nobody told us. We have more than few thousand people who signed a signature here who said no. We said no.
Tensions escalate on the southwest side as the city gets closer to housing at least 2,000 migrants at a base camp in Brighton Park.
The irony, some of the city's residents in dire need of support find themselves overshadowed by the crisis. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that the safety net you thought was there for you is now frayed and stretched over a much larger crowd. So as we navigate this complex issue, we're left with a pressing question. How do we balance compassion with practicality? It's a tightrope walk, balancing the needs of the migrants with the expectations and needs of the local population. As Chicago wrestles with this dilemma, the strain on public services serves as a stark reminder of the real-world implications of a crisis that's far from black and white. Stay tuned as we continue to dive deep into the heart of this issue, examining the delicate balancing act between providing refuge and preserving the integrity of our public services. It's a conversation that's not just about numbers on a budget sheet, but about the very fabric of our community in Chicago. The government's response.
I know folks may have questions about my style, but don't question my leadership.
In a city grappling with an unprecedented migrant surge, the spotlight inevitably turns to those at the helm, the government. And let me tell you, the response from both local and federal levels has been, well, Let's just say, it's raising more questions than answers. Straight off the bat, it's clear that the crisis on Chicago's streets isn't mirrored in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. While Chicagoans navigate the realities of tents on sidewalks and stretched public services, the nation's capital seems a world away from the front lines of this issue. It's a stark contrast that hasn't gone unnoticed, the question on everyone's mind. If the burden were shared more evenly, including in cities like D.C., would the approach be different? Now on to the local scene.
Black and brown neighborhoods, and particularly black communities, have been disinvested in. Keep in mind that the migrant crisis, this international global crisis, really requires a federal resource response.
What if the federal government doesn't help you?
Well, clearly they haven't thus far.
But is that sustainable?
No, it's not sustainable. The Congress does have to act. And if they do not act, this is going to continue to cause the type of chaos that the governor of Texas wants to do.
The mayor's doubling down on the importance of helping the asylum seekers.
You know, this is a global crisis. Policies that are impacting population shifts around the globe is affecting us all. These are asylum seekers. These are not illegal people. The moment they step on American soil, they are now officially protected by international law.
Mayor Brandon Johnson, stepping into a situation that can only be described as a hot potato, has been vocal about the need for support. Yet, critics argue that words are not enough. The actions taken, or perhaps the lack thereof, speak volumes. With emergency services overwhelmed and public spaces transforming before our very eyes, the call for a strategic, effective response grows louder. And then there's the Biden administration. The federal response has been under the microscope, scrutinized for its handling of the broader migrant crisis that's impacting cities like Chicago. Critics are quick to point out the disparity in the sense of urgency, comparing the federal government's approach to the situation unfolding on the ground. The administration's policies and decisions are in the spotlight, with many asking if the current strategy is sustainable or merely a band-aid on a gaping wound. But here's the kicker. As the debate rages on, the real-world implications of these governmental responses, or lack thereof, are felt most acutely by the residents of Chicago and the migrants at the center of this crisis. The call for a more cohesive, proactive strategy is loud and clear, not just for the sake of political points, but for the well-being of a city under strain. So as Chicago waits for a response that matches the scale of the challenge it faces, the situation serves as a litmus test for governmental action in times of crisis. Will the powers that be rise to the occasion, or will the Windy City be left to weather the storm with little more than promises and press releases? Only time will tell, but one thing's for certain. The eyes of Chicago, and indeed the nation, are watching. The migrant surge. What's really behind this sudden influx of migrants?
There's only one reason why this is happening, and that's because Joe Biden has eliminated all of the 4 policies that Donald Trump put in place that led to the lowest illegal border crossings in 40 years.
Joe Biden is not doing his job. Joe Biden is responsible for the largest amount of illegal immigration in the history of the United States, and there are deadly consequences because of that.
The story begins with Governor Abbott's decision to send migrants to sanctuary cities across the nation, including Chicago. Sanctuary cities, by their very definition, offer protection to undocumented immigrants, promising them safety from deportation. However, this well-intentioned policy is now under the microscope, as the reality of hosting thousands of newcomers starts to bite. Why Chicago, you ask? The city's open arms approach to migrants is rooted in a deep history of diversity and inclusion. But as romantic as that sounds, the reality on the ground paints a different picture. With resources stretched thin and neighborhoods struggling to cope, the question arises, is this policy sustainable, or are we witnessing a city spiraling into a crisis? Enter the Biden administration and Chicago's own mayor, Brandon Johnson. Their responses?
Let me say again, to any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear. I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
A cocktail of optimism and reassurances. But as the migrant numbers swell and the city's streets witness an unprecedented transformation, tents as homes and police stations turning into makeshift shelters, the optimism fades into concern. Critics argue that the administration's policies are a magnet for this surge, questioning if the open-door approach is inviting more challenges than the city can handle. But it's not just about the numbers, it's about the impact. Communities feeling the pinch, taxpayers watching their dollars stretch into directions they hadn't anticipated, and a city famed for its resilience, now grappling with a crisis that's testing its limits. So, as we delve deeper into this issue, one thing becomes clear. The migrant surge in Chicago is just beginning, and the problems we see may just be the start of something bigger. The solutions.
Trump campaigned on build that wall. Are you willing to tear that wall down?
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed on my administration.
In a city grappling with a migrant surge, the cry for solutions is deafening. Chicagoans, bearing the brunt of stretched resources and shifting priorities, are looking to their leaders for answers. But the response from the government? It's been a mixed bag, leaving many to wonder if the urgency of the crisis is truly understood beyond the city's limits. Let's cut to the chase. While Chicago's streets swell with the influx of migrants, a notable observation has been made. The streets of Washington, D.C. don't seem to share the same fate. Yes, you heard that right. The nation's capital, the hub of political decision-making, remains relatively untouched by the very policies that have sent cities like Chicago into a tailspin. This disparity has not gone unnoticed, raising eyebrows and questions about the distribution of responsibility and the federal government's role in managing the crisis. Criticism has been leveled at the federal response, or some argue the lack thereof. Calls for a more equitable distribution of migrants, support for overstretched local resources, and a coherent national strategy have grown louder. Yet, the solutions offered seem to trickle rather than flow, leaving local governments to fend for themselves in the face of mounting challenges. But let's talk solutions, real solutions that go beyond Band-Aid fixes. Many argue that a re-evaluation of border policies is overdue, suggesting that a more stringent approach could alleviate the pressure on sanctuary cities. The idea is not without controversy, but the logic is straightforward. Reduce the influx, lessen the burden on local resources, and allow cities like Chicago to breathe. Governor Abbott's stance, sending migrants to sanctuary cities as a form of protest against federal policies, has certainly sparked debate. But it also underscores a deeper issue, the need for a collaborative, well-thought-out strategy that addresses the root causes of migration rather than just its symptoms. The conversation around solutions is complex, filled with ethical considerations and practical realities. But one thing is clear. The current approach is not sustainable. As Chicago seeks ways to navigate the crisis, the need for a unified, comprehensive strategy that considers the well-being of both migrants and local communities has never been more critical. Stay with us as we continue to explore the unfolding narrative, seeking solutions that are not just about managing numbers, but about fostering a community that can thrive amidst the challenges. The road ahead is fraught with obstacles, but the pursuit of effective, humane solutions is a journey we must undertake together. The conclusion.
12th District Chicago police officers about 6:20 this morning dealing with an increasingly tense situation, taking 2 alleged offenders into custody, police sources identifying the offenders as migrants.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Chicago's migrant crisis, it's clear that this is more than just a local issue. It's a reflection of broader challenges that require urgent attention and action. The impact on the streets, the strain on public services, the government's response, and the search for sustainable solutions all paint a picture of a city and a nation at a crossroads. The facts are on the table. Chicago, a city celebrated for its spirit and resilience, is being tested like never before. The influx of migrants has brought to the forefront the need for a balanced approach that respects the dignity and rights of all individuals while also ensuring the well-being of the local population. It's a delicate balance, one that demands thoughtful consideration and decisive action. Criticism of the government's response, particularly the perceived inaction at the federal level and the contrasting situation in cities like Washington, D.C., underscores the need for a unified strategy that goes beyond political rhetoric. The call for solutions is loud and clear, from reevaluating border policies to ensuring a fair distribution of resources and responsibilities. The time for decisive action is now. But let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. This crisis offers an opportunity for reflection, for reimagining how we address migration, integration, and community support in an increasingly interconnected world. The stories from the streets of Chicago are a reminder of our shared humanity and the collective responsibility we hold to create a society that uplifts everyone. In conclusion, the migrant crisis in Chicago is a wake-up call, a moment for us to come together and forge a path forward that honors our values, respects our differences, and builds a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. The journey ahead is undoubtedly challenging, but with empathy, collaboration, and a commitment to action, we can turn this crisis into an opportunity for growth and transformation. Stay tuned, stay informed, and let's continue the conversation, because together we can shape the future of Chicago and indeed the future of our nation.